Solving Quadratic Study Guide by Rolling with Bowling. Let's roll right in.
Okay, I'm going to start going over their study guide. The first question I'm going to go over is from the evens. Okay, so this is going to be the even portion, so number 2. And it says that you need to solve by factoring. So we're going to factor these. So you have 8x squared minus 16x plus 4 equals 4. So the first thing you need to do is set this equal to 0. So you're going to subtract 4. And what happens is these both cancel out. So now you have 8x squared minus 16x equals 0. Okay, once you have two terms that have the same exact variable, you can use this by taking out the GCF. Because both of these have an x, so you just divide everything by 8x. So when you divide by 8x, you have 8x on the outside, and then you have x minus 2 as a factor. You have to solve these. So you have to set them equal to 0. Okay, so 8x has to be set equal to 0, and then x minus 2 has to be set equal to 0. So then to get x by itself over here, you're going to divide by 8, x equals 0. And then over here you want x by itself, so you're going to add 2. So then you have x equals 2. So you have two answers. So you have x equals 0 and 2. Okay, so the next problem you're going to factor, so you want to get it equal to 0. Okay, so you're going to get this equal to 0, so you're going to add 3 and add 3. So you have 3x squared minus 4x, and this is going to be plus 1 equals 0. You'll have to notice, you have to keep in mind that this a is greater than 1, so you have to use the AC method. So you need something that multiplies to be 3 times 1, so multiplies to be 3, and then adds to be 1. So, adds to be negative 4. So I can do negative 3 and times negative 1, and then negative 3 plus negative 1. So I'm going to do the AC method, so that means I copy the first term and you copy the last term. So copy the first term. Inside, you're going to put that negative 3x minus 1x, and then copy the last term. And then you group them together and take out the GCF. So I can take a 3x out of both of these. So 3x comes out, and then I'm left with x minus 1. And then here I can take out a negative 1. And then I'm left with x minus 1. And these are always supposed to match. And you guys should remember that from the last unit. So then one of my factors is the GCF. So 3x minus 1 equals 0. And then x minus 1 equals 0. So now you have to solve that. So you're basically getting x by itself. So you'd add 1. So then you'd have 3x equals 1. And then divide by 3. So one of your answers will be 1/3. And then the other answer would be, you'd add 1, so x equals 1. So you'd have x equals 1, and you'd have x equals 1/3. All right, number 6, we're going to solve the same exact way. You have to solve by factoring. So we want this to equal 0. So we're going to subtract 2 and subtract 2. And those cancel out. Okay, so this cancels both of these out. Now, this is similar to the one that we did for number 2, where you're just left with two variables. So you have 3b squared minus 2b equals 0. So you can't really pull anything out of those except for a b. Okay, So you'll pull out a b, and then you'll be left with 3b minus 2, which is kind of weird, but you're still going to be able to set these equal to 0. So the GCF, you put b equals 0, so one of your answers is 0. Then for your factor, you have 3b minus 2 equals 0. You want to get b by itself, so you add 2, 3b equals 2, and then you divide by 3, b equals 0, and b equals 2/3. All right, this is when you're going to solve using the square root method. You're going to solve using the square root method when you don't have a b. So I don't have a b, so I am going to move this -4 to the other side, so I'm going to add 4. And then I have 25x squared equals 16. Then I'm going to divide by whatever's in front of x, just like I would in the 7th grade, because you're just solving for x. Okay? So then I have x squared equals 16 over 25. This is actually good, and it works out well because you can take the square root of both of those. You take the square root to cancel out the x squared, and so you take the square root of both of these. So the square root of 16 is 4, and the square root of 25 is 5. So it's plus or minus 4 over 5, which you can write this as x equals -4 over 5, and x equals positive 4 over 5. Okay, number 10, you're going to use the square root method as well. So you're going to subtract the 4, then you get 2, then you have 2v squared equals 2, then you divide by 2, because you have to divide by whatever's in front of v, right? So v squared equals 1, and then you take the square root of both of those. So when you take the square root of both of those, it's v equals plus or minus 1. So your answer is v equals 1, and then v equals -1. And you can either write it like this, or you could write it as 2, like 2 separate. It's the same thing. The answer is 1 and -1. Number 12, we're going to use the complete the square method. The whole point of this is to get c to the other side so that you have room to make a perfect square trinomial. So we have a squared plus 10a, and then I want this 12 to be over here, so I would subtract the 12. So then I would have a space right here, and this would equal -9, and then I would have another space right here. And inside my square, I'm going to put b divided by 2 squared. I don't have an a value, like I don't have anything in front of the a, so I don't have to divide by anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this b, so 10 divided by 2 squared, which is 25. So inside that little square, I'm going to put a 25. And inside this little square, I'm going to put a 25. So on the left side, you're going to always factor. And on the right side, you're going to combine. So you have 16. And then over here, you're going to factor. So when you factor this, you need something that multiplies to be 25, but then adds to be 10. And there's only 2 numbers that can do that. It's that's 5 and 5. So then I would put a plus 5 squared. And you're always going to, if you have something that's not like a variable plus or minus squared, then you did something wrong. Because you should be able to take the square root of both of these now. Square root over here, square root over here. When you take the square root on this side, you're just going to have a plus 5 left, because these cancel out, the squared and the square root. And then the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. Now I have to get a by itself, so I'm going to subtract from both sides. when I subtract, that number that I'm subtracting or adding, depending on the problem, is going to go in front. So you have A equals negative 5, because you were subtracting 5, plus or minus 4. Okay, from that, you should be able to write two equations. You have negative 5 plus 4 and negative 5 minus 4. Negative 5 plus 4 is going to give you negative 1. Negative 5 minus 4 is going to give you negative 9. So your two answers are going to be x equals negative 9 and negative 1. The next one is number 14, and you're going to complete the square. The good part of this is that C is already empty. There's no C value. So you can just put a box. So 8x squared plus 16x, put a box there because we don't have a C, equals 10, and then we're going to put a box. Okay, there is an A value for this one, so you have to divide. You cannot complete the square unless this number is gone. So then you got to divide everything by the front number. So 8, 8, and 8. Divide that all out. So you're going to divide this and you get x squared plus 2x box equals 10 over 8. Just leave it. Box. Now we have to, and just one quick note is when you have 10 over 8, if you have a fraction, when you put that in your calculator to add, you have to put parentheses around it. So I'm going to put parentheses around it so that I can remember that I need to do that in my calculator. Because I'm not about to add or subtract fractions by hand. I'm going to put it in my calculator. So what you need to do is now you can do b squared divided by 2. Notice that, look, the b up here was 16, and now it became 2. So if you forget to divide, everything's going to be wrong. Because you have to divide so that you can get x squared by itself. So 2 divided by 2 squared is going to give you, 2 divided by 2 is 1, squared is 1. So everywhere that I have a box, I'm going to put a 1. And I'm going to put a 1. So you're going to factor the left side. So you have x, something that multiplies to be 1 adds to be 2. So x plus 1 squared. When I stick this in my calculator, I'm going to put parentheses 10 divided by 8, parentheses plus 1. Then you're going to hit math, enter, enter. Okay, after you put this in your calculator, you get 9 over 4. Then you're going to take the square root of both sides. So you have x plus 1 equals plus or minus. Square root of 9 is 3. The square root of 4 is 2. So it would be plus or minus 3 halves. To get x by itself, you have to subtract the 1. So you got to subtract the 1 on both sides. So then you're going to end up with x equals negative 1 plus or minus 3 halves. So in your calculators, you need to put negative 1 plus 3 halves and negative 1 minus 3 halves. And you should get two answers. You should get one that is negative 5 over 2 after you hit math, enter, enter. And then you should get one that is 1/2. So those two are your answers. And you can write them out like 1/2 and then negative 5 over 2. Remember, if you see fractions on your answers, then you're always going to want to hit math, enter, enter, because that converts a decimal to a fraction. With number 16, you're going to solve with the quadratic formula, but I don't want you to move this to this side. I would actually just prefer that you move the 16 and the negative 4 over. So you would have 2v squared plus 4v minus 16. Because this is the opposite, because when you move it across the equal sign, negative 4v becomes positive 4v, and then 16 becomes negative 16. So your A is 2, your B is 4, your C is negative 16. And you have to plug it into the quadratic formula. And then you put negative 4 plus or minus the square root of b, which is 4 squared, minus 4 times 2 times negative 16, over 2a, so 2 times 2. Okay, this right here is 16, and then, so 4 squared, because what you're going to do is the insides first. The insides are called the discriminant, if you guys forgot that. So you have 4 squared, and then you have negative 8 times negative 16, and that's 128. So you have 128 plus 16. So inside is going to be negative 4 on the outside, and inside is going to be 144. And then 2 times 2 is 4. So this becomes positive because you have a negative and a negative. So that's positive 132, and then you add the 16. So a lot of people, they take the square root of 144, and they write this. They put negative 4, and then they say square root of 12. It's not the square root of 12 anymore. The square root of 144 is just regular 12. So you take that out. And then you would put plus or minus 12 over 4. And you have two equations. Okay, you have one that is negative 4 plus 12 divided by 4. And then you have one that's negative 4 minus 12 divided by 4. When you do this, you have negative 8 divided by 4. That equals negative 2. And then this is negative 16 divided by 4. Well, that's positive 8. I'm sorry. Going back. This is positive 8. So your answer would be positive 2. I messed that up. Oops. And then negative 16 divided by 4 is negative 4. So your two answers are going to be x equals 2 and negative 4. Number 18 says, explain in your own words how to take the square root to solve a quadratic equation. So to take the square root to solve a quadratic equation, you're going to only do that if your equation does not have a b. So usually it looks like ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. But you only use the square root if there's no b. So your equation would look like ax squared plus c. So there would be no b. In that case, you're just going to isolate x. So you would isolate, spell that wrong. And square root both sides. And then you always have to remember that you have like a plus and the minus. Okay, so you have two equations. All right, number 20, you're going to find the discriminant. You have to remember that the discriminant is just the inside part of the quadratic formula. So it's b squared minus 4ac. And this tells me how many solutions that I have. So before I can find the discriminant, this has to equal 0. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to subtract the 2. And when you subtract the 2, you get negative 10. So you have 4n squared minus 2n minus 10 equals 0. And then you have a equals negative 4, b equals negative 2, and c equals negative 10. And so you just plug this in. So b squared is negative 2 squared minus 4, and then times negative 4 times c. So negative 2 squared, you'll have 4, and then this will become negative 4 times negative 4 is going to give you 16, positive 16, and then times another negative 10 is going to give you negative 160, which your answer is negative 156. Okay, the only thing that this tells you is how many solutions. So you would have 2 imaginary solutions. That means you'll have 2 complex solutions or 2 answers with an imaginary number. So you would put 2 complex, and then that will give you 2 complex solutions. You can also put 2 non-real. On your test, it's going to be 2 non-real solutions.